But let's talk about something else now. Let's talk about the plight of the Cape Parrot. One of the contenders for Bafana Bafana bird, because it's a green and yellow bird, like Bafana Bafana is a green and yellow soccer team. Steve Boys is a postdoctoral fellow at the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute and working with the Cape Parrot program. Hello, Steve.
Hello, John.
Back in Cape Town, where there are no Cape Parrots, you're spending a lot of time in the field these days where there are Cape Parrots.
Absolutely, up in Hogsback in the Eastern Cape.
Which is where I come from, so it was one of the first birds I learned to recognise by call and by sight. But it's a population which has crashed really in quite alarming ways over the last couple of decades.
Absolutely. I mean, we're sitting with not more than 1,000 left in the wild, and some quite shocking results from recent studies we've been doing.
All right. What are the mooted reasons for that decline?
I mean, historically, over the last 350 years, we've done a pretty good job of destroying our yellowwood forests, kind of starting down south and moving up north. Not many of the large trees remain, and these parrots are dependent upon them.
So it's all about habitat?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the beginning, and then the parrots, now finding that their forests were degraded, had to move out of the forests and started feeding on things like pecans, cherries, plums, basically on our small holdings and farms. The farmers became upset at this and started persecuting them, shooting at them, catching them in nets, and as a result, parrots started arriving in captivity. And then we started catching them to profit from them, and it just contributed to the decline.
Steve, what's the sort of bottom line population for continued survival in the wild? Are we getting close to that point?
I would say we are, because it's three separate populations. One in the Eastern Cape, that's the southernmost population, one in the Transkei, and another population in southern KZN. Each of those populations are, I'd say, below 400, probably around 300 birds in each of those populations.
And in what, 150, what's a viable population? At what point do we start waving goodbye to the Cape Parrot?
That's maybe what we're experiencing now. It was actually in November 2008 we began receiving photographs and reports of parrots dying on people's properties. The photographs were quite shocking in the sense that these birds had no feathers on them, their beaks had completely degraded away, and it wasn't one or two reports, it was 30, 40 reports. And this spurred us into the research we're doing now.
So, I mean, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to find ways, because if you can't plant the trees, trees that tall take too long to grow. By the time they're tall enough for the Cape Parrots to roost and feed in, the Cape Parrot population is gone. So what is the save the parrot strategy?
It's definitely a feel-good thing to be planting food species that they traditionally have been eating. But the parrot is a very industrious creature, so they're making their own plan. They're focusing on things that we've planted up in orchards and on our private properties. So their diet has changed drastically, and that may be contributing to what we're seeing now. Since May this year, we've been catching them in pecan orchards in the Eastern Cape to take blood and feather samples, and have quite alarmingly discovered that over 65% of those samples test positive for a beak and feather disease.
And beak and feather disease in a Cape Parrot is a fatal disease, is it?
Not necessarily. This is the first time we're actually seeing the birds dying from this disease. We think it's been in the population forever, similar to our flus. But it's reached a tipping point now where just this year we saw, I would say, out of the flock of 100 birds that I'm monitoring, 35 of them have probably died.
Okay, now, I don't like the idea of any species, whether it is an insect species or a plant species, or my particular favorite in the animal kingdom, a bird species going extinct. But how important do we accept that people like you are going to try very hard to save them, but probably in 20 or 30 years' time we'll be talking about 2 and 4 Cape Parrots in the wild?
Not at all. We are going to make a difference. I mean, the disease problem is our primary focus right now. We're looking at the option of developing a vaccine with limited application in the wild, but it may be useful to us. We're possibly looking at removing some of these very sick birds from the wild so that they don't reinfect other birds, and rehabilitating them before release back into the wild. We have found that these infected birds can be brought back and develop a level of immunity to the disease.
So you're not giving up. You're going to save the Cape Parrot.
I am. I'm passionate about it, and I'm not going to stop. I know it's not going to take me 2 years or 3 years or 5. It's going to take a lifetime, and I'll hand over to the next person when I'm unable to continue.
Hey, I love that passion. I love that passion and that commitment. Steve Boys, postdoctoral fellow at the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute. A brief insight there into the Cape Parrot program with which he is so passionately involved. 29 minutes now to 4 o'clock, and with the latest